had some very unique individuals labeled, of course, by the title, of course, of the episode. Well, not all of them made the actual title of the episode, but, the low talker, a woman who, Jerry doesn't know her first name, but he just knows it rhymes with the female anatomy, old man, some upcoming in the future as well, such as like a close talker. Well, all of them weren't quite in there, but not so much titles, but more so like way people were labeled. This episode had, kind of like, one who was labeled, in the title, as well as, one of the main guest stars of the show in the lip reader. Good episode. I like this episode. As I like pretty much just about all the Seinfeld episodes. Some of them I'm just like, they're whatever, but some of them stand out to me. And the lip reader, of course, does stand out as a good episode. An idea that was pitched by Carol Leifer. The idea of having a friend who's deaf, but can read lips, and people wanted to treat it like it's like some big deal, and it's like some type of like an instrument, some way to use it to their advantage or whatnot, which was kind of like a good George story, even though of course the woman was dating Jerry. So this episode, and a big theme about this episode is tennis. Jerry and George are at a tennis match and watching the tennis game, making a casual chit chat. Jerry, though, is attracted to the ball girl, and Jerry thinks that maybe after the match he'll go down and try to talk to her and get her number, maybe, or something. George, though, meanwhile, he goes off to get a hot fudge sundae. Kramer is back at Jerry's apartment watching the tennis match, and George was just like carelessly eating this hot fudge sundae. He's got like fudge like dripping down his face. Like, his face was a mess. It was priceless, though funny though. And of course, Kramer's laughing, and of course it may have costed George his relationship. We'll get to that momentarily. Jerry, though, as he was waiting for George to come back, when the match is over, he goes down and tries to talk to this ball girl. Her back, though, was turned towards Jerry, and Jerry tries to say hi, get her attention. How you doing? She won't answer him. So finally, Jerry gets pissed off and he starts ranting, basically, about it to her. But again, she doesn't turn around, and it looks like at first she's completely ignoring him. So then finally, she turns around, seems a tad bit startled, and Jerry goes, "Oh, about time. What are you, deaf?" And she just goes, "Bingo!" And then it was just like, holy smokes, she is deaf. Meanwhile, though, get that a second. Then later on, back at the apartment, Jerry's sharing it with George and Kramer and whatnot. Well, with Kramer, how she's deaf. Kramer also mentions how he knows some sign language as well, and wonders if he was able to read lips or something like that. Well, didn't get to that part yet. But George, though, unfortunately, he was out to lunch with his girlfriend Gwen. She, though, breaks up with him. She won't really give him a reason why. He doesn't quite understand. The most he can get out of her was, "It's not you, it's me." And it was George's like, "It's not you, it's me. That's my philosophy." He came up with that, as he said, but she just wouldn't tell him. Later, when George goes back to the apartment, Kramer's chuckling and tells him how he saw him on TV, and how he was, when he was eating his ice cream, and the announcers were kind of making fun of him and said something like, "There's an invention out there called the napkin." George thinks that Gwen may have seen that, which caused her to break up with him. And of course, not long later, Jerry's parents call and Kramer answer, and they saw him on TV too, and George is like super embarrassed, and he wants to somehow find out some way if that's the reason or not. They're supposed to be going to do some party later on that week, and he knows that Gwen's going to be there, so he's not sure if it's going to be awkward for him going or not. But then, of course, he finds out, of course, about Jerry's girlfriend who's deaf, and again, it's still the time where George is living with his parents, so he's trying to find any excuse to get out of the house. So Jerry invites him to tag along with him on his date with Laura. Meanwhile, Elaine, their Lexington line service, I think it was, at Pendant Publishing, was backed up. And Elaine needed to get to a meeting. So her coworker suggested taking their limo line or whatnot. Elaine didn't want to because, and like I said before, I love the characters, but definitely times with Elaine, there's some things that she comes across as super petty. And this to me is one of them. Elaine didn't want to do it because the limo driver is always trying to make chit chat with her, to make casual conversation, and she doesn't want anything to do with it. So she finally, of course, has no choice. She agrees, and then the guy's talking, and he's like asking hey, you're from Pendant Publishing, what do you do? This and that. Just being casual chit chat. It wasn't like hit on her or anything. He says about the jumbles, how he likes to do his jumble puzzles and all this and that. So Elaine finally is like, yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing. I'm going a little deaf in my one ear. And pretend he can't hear, so then he finally stops talking. But then, of course, unfortunately, her secret, her lie, was exposed, because they said something in the line about how after Elaine gets dropped off, the guy's going to be picking up Tom Hanks. And Elaine gets excited about that. She's a big fan of Tom Hanks. And, of course, the limo driver obviously was upset, but he's like, yeah, no, I know you're type too good to make conversation with a guy like me. You're making fun of the jumbles or something like that, he said. So yeah, he was not too happy about that. Obviously offended, even though to Elaine it's no big deal, but she still felt bad and thought, oh, maybe I'll get him tickets to some type of a rock concert to make up for it or something like that. Which that backfires, of course, but we'll get to that later on. But anyways, so George goes to out with Jerry on his date with Laura to have dinner. They're sitting there, they're just talking, but then Laura stops and says that couple is breaking up over there. And George is like, how does she know that? And Jerry mentions how she reads lips. And then George is like, what are they saying? And of course she says, the female was saying, it's not you, it's me, which of course cracks it up because it just comes full circle again. Like, again, that whole, not as big this time, but this whole thing of one of the characters, whether it's a main character or a guest star, being kind of absent from the, from like a line said earlier in the show, it goes full circle when they ironically just happen to say it. Here comes probably my favorite scene in the episode. Definitely one of the best ones in the series, I would say. So, George gets this idea where he considers asking Jerry if there's any way that they can take Laura to the party in a few days that they're going to, and she could read Gwen's lips for him. What? Bring her to the party, and she can read Gwen's lips for him. Kind of doing a little acting out there thing, but basically, originally in the script, it was supposed. This scene was supposed to be more of they turn away and talk more about it, oh my goodness, they can do this for me and turn away. But no, Jason Alexander and Jerry Seinfeld, on the fly, thought of the idea of maybe doing 5 or 6 organic things to cover their mouth to at first hope that Laura doesn't see what they're saying. I think it started off with George lifting up his drink, and then Jerry is just like, what? And then George taking a handful of peanuts going, we bring her to the party and she can read what Gwen's saying about me. And then Jerry again just goes he's not an novelty, not George. And then he goes no, it's a skill. It's just like juggling. And then, Napkin, I don't know, George. Would you just ask her? If it's no, case closed. Basically, they came up with those all on the spot. And to me, the fact that they came up with that on the spot, they made it look just so natural. It wasn't like there was no hesitation whatsoever to those organic things they did just to cover their mouth. It just flowed so good, and how they did not crack up was just something to me. So finally, when they were done, thinking that and even too, they're showing Laura, who's just looking around at the same time as they're doing it, mind her own business. It didn't seem like she even knew what they were talking about. So Jerry starts to go, Laura, we were just wondering, and she goes, sure, I'll do it. So it's all that time, she still, knew what the plan was. So she agreed to go to the party and read lips of Gwen and see if she says something about George. But it almost backfired at first, because Jerry took her home that night and they're discussing plans for the party, and he said, I'll pick you up at 6. And she started, she's like, 6 is good. Of course, yeah, it just ironically, well, not ironic, but it was, in a bad time, because apparently Laura thought Jerry said sex instead of 6. They talked it over, and of course, things, got level-headed with them, but what's it again? But that starts to concern George. Okay, she can read lips, but she mixed up 6 with sex, so he's concerned that their plan may not work. Kramer, meanwhile, though, also is trying to become a ball boy. Like how Laura is a ball girl, he wants to be a ball boy. But they're trying to let him know, hey, it's a ball boy, not a ball man. Which, of course, this is one of several times where Kramer does something someone 2 or 3 times younger than him should be doing. We'll talk about that when we get to the episode where he does karate with a bunch of little kids. But he wants to be a ball boy. He tries out for it, and even people were making fun of him, calling him grandpa and whatnot. He was the best one to do it. He was smooth and everything too. Unfortunately, it backfired though. So, I think it was later in the episode, they were getting ready to go to the party, and they were going to use the same limo service that Elaine had used, but offended that driver. And they were fine until Elaine got in. And I guess the guy was, before she got in, the guy was saying that he couldn't hear him too well because his ears were ringing from a rock concert he went to. And he thinks that, the lady did it on purpose, obviously, because probably thinking that, she didn't want me to be able to, talk to her again or whatnot. Then when Elaine gets in the car, he kicks them all out. They make it to the party, and George was talking to his friend Todd, who basically told me, I know we're good friends, but I'm also Gwen's friend, so I can't really disclose any information. George's like, oh, don't worry, I'll just stay on the opposite side of the room while you go talk with Gwen. Okay. So Kramer, of course, was trying to see if he can read lips also, but he was also talking in sign language with Laura, as Laura was reading lips. Things seemed going well. It was natural. Todd and Gwen, though, started talking about how the place is a mess, and they basically said, well, they can say afterwards help clean together. Well, when they said sweep, Kramer interpreted and Laura interpreted as, well, I'm sorry, Laura did, I think, do the sign language for sweep, but Kramer mistook it as sleep, which caused George to flip out, and of course he embarrassed himself, and then Laura, I think, accidentally smacked him in the eye or something like that, so he hurt his eye and everything, and it was just all wreck. So then, obviously, that all went down, and I don't know if Jerry and Laura just broke up or, whatnot, because obviously, Laura, well, even though it's more so Kramer's goof up, but the show ends with them going to watch another tennis match, and Monica Sells was in the match, and Kramer accidentally ran into her while trying to retrieve her ball and injured her, unfortunately. And then the episode ends with Laura getting into the limo driver's car, the same limo driver seen the whole episode, and he's trying to make conversation about by saying, you hear about the ball boy who took out Monica Sells? And then she looks up and just goes, "I'm deaf. I'm deaf." And then the guy just gives like a dirty look, but even though unfortunately she for real was deaf. And that's the episode that ended. Pretty funny episode. Again, my favorite scene, and again, it's definitely one of my favorite scenes in the series, is still that dinner scene when they just naturally thought of those like 5 or 6 like organic things. Like sometimes, like again, like my dad and I would just jokingly do it for heck of, like I just did right now, going, "Oh my gosh, mom's pasta could use a little more salt," or something like that. Which no, I never made fun of my mom's cooking, but we still just jokingly pick on her for the heck of it. Well, then again, my mom will get here, of course. But not really many fun facts. It did Marlee Matlin, who played Laura, again was apparently very funny. A lot of people liked her. She seemed very good at comedy, and I do agree. But apparently, she did moon the cast and crew one time as a joke, which is pretty funny. And then the scene where Kramer runs into Monica Sells on the court. They were trying to get the real Monica Sells at first, but she turned down the offer, so they threw in a stunt double there instead. But yeah, that's basically it, and that's the lip reader. Again, good episode. I like it. The next episode we do is kind of one of my favorites. It's an underrated episode, but it's one of my favorites. And it's actually, besides ones with like they had to reshoot because of a different actor. This is the only episode I think there is that has 2 different versions of it. Not because of 2 different actors, but 2 different directions for the main story. Well, it kind of ties into all the stories pretty much, somewhat. But we'll talk about that next, in the next episode. So guys, what were your thoughts on the lip reader episode? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. And follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Till then guys, I'm checking out. I'll see you all later. Have a great rest of your night. And peace out everybody.